It's almost over, the voting part, that is. It's an election year filled with more dramatic twists than any in recent memory. The polls say the presidential race is a dead heat. Local races in Minnesota and Wisconsin are also fluid, with last-minute surges and last-minute questions about who will come out on top. Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. The most recent poll in Minnesota shows a Trump surge, with Harris holding on to a narrow 3-point lead. The latest average of all Wisconsin polls show a slight Trump edge in what really amounts to a statistical tie. We'll dig into other Wisconsin races, specifically in western Wisconsin. Hear why some local western Wisconsin races could have reverse coattails, spurring turnout that could affect the presidential vote. All year, I've been talking to Democratic analyst Abou Amara and Republican analyst Amy Koch. Well, this evening, you will hear their thoughts as we are almost at the end of this wild election ride. For Wisconsin, I'm turning to political science professor Anthony Chergosky of UW-La Crosse for his insights on not only the presidential race, but a suddenly tied U.S. Senate race and some western Wisconsin races that could shape the outcome of the state's presidential count. But first, Amy and Abou. Well, the race for the president is a tie, according to really almost all the polls. It's amazing how consistent they've been. Joined by Democratic analyst Abou Amara, Republican Amy Koch. Why are we tied after a year of basically, well, they weren't tied earlier, were they? Joe Biden was way behind, then Kamala Harris was up, and now Republican Donald Trump is surging. What is happening?
Well, what I think you saw was, well, first of all, an artificial surge by Donald Trump because Joe Biden was so obviously struggling. And then Joe Biden leaves the race, and then you see a bit of an artificial surge for Vice President Harris because people are just so relieved. Democrats are so relieved that he's out of the race and that they've got a shot at this. And then things started to even out. And I said here many times, she didn't get the bump she needed. She didn't get the lift that she needed.
She got a lift, but she didn't get 10%.
Get enough. She didn't get what she needed.
3 or 4%.
And she didn't have a staying power. And frankly, things that are bad, economy, immigration, Israel, things that people are thinking about right now as they go to the polls, is the Biden administration, and the Biden-Harris administration is being hung with it.
What do you think, Abou?
Look, I think this race has gone to baseline. It was always going to be an extremely close race. It is true there have been peaks and valleys, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, but at the end of the day, we are pretty much where we were going to be. Now, moving forward, what does that mean? I think Democrats have to be banking tens of thousands of votes each day, because on election day, it's very likely more Republicans will vote than Democrats. And to me, that's the fundamental question here. The polling really doesn't tell us much. It tells us it's a very close race. We already knew that. The question is going to be now for the next 9 days. What is happening on the ground, banking those votes to make sure that you can push back against what I think will be some overperformance by Donald Trump in terms of the polling?
I have wondered and been wondering about the underpolling of Donald Trump that's happened the past 2 presidential races. Obviously, we all know 2016, pollsters got it completely wrong. They had Hillary Clinton sizably ahead, Donald Trump wins. But in 2020, Joe Biden won. He was ahead by about 7. It was closer than that, but Trump was underpolled by about 4 points. What is that about? Are they still underpolling Donald Trump supporters?
Right. It's not actually the pollsters, I contend. I contend it's the people answering the poll that don't want to say they're voting for Trump.
So they pick up the phone.
They pick up the phone and they say, I haven't decided, and they hang up the phone.
But really, they have decided.
They have decided, or they break that way, right? There's just a large segment of particularly Republicans that have kind of gone back and forth. Like they don't like how Trump's how he talks. They don't like January 6th. They don't like a lot of things. And yet, they see sort of like the Democrats go, well, hold my beer. And we go, oh, nope, not that party. That's right. We're not that party. And that's what you see happening. And in the end, I don't think they break for Vice President Harris.
Is this happening this year? Because if it does, Donald Trump is way ahead.
Well, I think it's going to happen, but it's not going to be as big as we think. Look, if you just look at the trend line, 2016, the polling was off significantly. 2020, the polling was off less. It was still off, but it was off less. So the trend line is it's actually getting closer to where Donald Trump's support score is. And so I think ultimately the pollsters have learned from 2016. They've learned from 2020. So there will be an overperformance, but I don't think it's going to be as big as it was in 2020 or 2016.
Also, I think that the Democrats have lost the advantage in the ground game. in the last couple cycles.
Well,
early
Republicans have been
voting.
saying that for a long time. Many
but
election cycles.
Right, but
we've got a ground game too.
Particularly in early voting.
Yeah.
When you saw when Nevada came out with their first numbers, Republicans were significantly above Democrats in the first day of early voting in Nevada.
And that's a big change.
That's a big change.
Well, let me ask you this. I wonder, just in talking to voters, I have come across people saying, you know, I really don't like Donald Trump's disposition. I don't like the way he speaks. I don't like the way he uses curse words, but I'm going to vote for him. And before it was Donald Trump is just wonderful, but there people seem to be embracing the flaws and not being so worried about them, but being very open about them. Or is this just me and La La Land here?
No, I actually agree with that. I think what happens is when you are familiar with somebody, the day-to-day kind of tussle is less of a thing.
Yeah.
When Donald Trump in 2016, this is a guy who we knew in one world was going into a completely different world of politics. So everything he did was like, oh my God, it's such a big deal. Now I think that's not the sense that voters have. And I think that is an advantage, but it's also a problem for the Democrats because we have to contrast with Donald Trump, and in a way, it's kind of Teflon Don. I mean, the things that you throw at him don't necessarily attach the same way as they would have in 2020. And so, again, Kamala's team is going to have to figure out in the next 9 days, how do you contrast, but at the same time affirmatively set forth your vision to close that gap that the polling is showing?
I think that the Harris team has been too focused on negative Trump and not focused enough on why Vice President Harris. I don't hear anything positive from surrogates. I don't hear anything. It's all Donald Trump stinks, Donald Trump this, and people, it's baked in. Everybody knows and either likes or doesn't like or accepts Donald Trump. And so what we didn't know was Vice President Harris. And I don't feel like in the last 2 months, and it's a short time, I give it, but what has she done that's like elevated and why we should vote for her?
Well, I do think one really tough moment for her was when she was on The View, and she was asked by Sonny Hostin, an attorney, what would you do differently than Joe Biden? And she didn't have an answer to that. I think she should have seen that question coming, but that's played in ads, and I don't think that's going well for her.
Yeah, look, I critiqued that. I thought that was a foreseeable question and it was a problem. To me, look, this is an unprecedented election in terms of you have two people running for office. One has actually been the president, and one is the sitting vice president. So Kamala Harris's team has decided to try to make this a referendum on Donald Trump.
Right. It is all about Donald Trump, isn't it?
They tried to make it a referendum on Donald Trump. The problem with that is voters seem to be asking, this is a choice election. They seem to be, based on the polling that we're seeing. And if it's a choice election rather than a referendum on Donald Trump, it's a much more difficult task for the Democrats.
All right, well, listen, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we're back with Amy Koch, Republican analyst, and Democratic analyst Abou Amara. We're going to talk about some Minnesota races. The big one that's getting the most attention here is the 2nd Congressional District, Joe Tairab versus Angie Craig. Seems to be getting a little nastier in the commercials. Is Angie Craig safe, or does Joe Tairab have a chance?
You know, if I have to put money on the race, I think Angie Craig will pull this out. I think I think largely because Joe has not had enough time. I think if we had another month on this election, we'd see something. But Joe got in real late. Not that he got in late, but there was a lot of shenanigans on the GOP side.
We won't
for
go
the primary.
into it, but the shenanigans were just nutty. I mean, there's something nutty every time with CD2. But
and so while the GOP is infighting, Angie Craig is running really like very moderate, independent, anti-Washington politician ads, and that has to help.
Driving her four-wheeler around town.
Here's the deal. She's raised a ton of money.
Yeah.
The majority for the Democrats in the House goes through districts like this, right? These are the types of districts you have to show you can hold so you can take the majority, and ultimately Hakeem Jeffries would be the Speaker of the House. So to me, this is actually it's a safe but close race. I'm not too concerned about it. But if Democrats were to lose it, it would be a bellwether for what's happening elsewhere, that something's going on, that maybe Trump's overperforming and Democrats are sagging a bit. So to me, this is an important district to look to, but I don't think it's actually a very competitive one.
It's a district that if this turns out to be some sort of a wave election with Donald Trump coattails, that Joe could pull this one out.
All right. Well, that'll be interesting. Angie Craig, obviously running so many ads because she does have so much money, including one where she's been endorsed by the police union.
Yeah.
No.
And I
Very.
think that's a powerful one for a Democrat coming from Minnesota with all the history we've had in the past few years. Let's talk about CD3. This is actually an open seat. Dean Phillips' seat. He's not running again. You've got Senator Kelly Morrison running against a longtime political figure in this community, Tad Jude. He's been a judge. He's been a county commissioner. He was in the state legislature. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I know Tad, I know Kelly. I like them both. Tad does have a ton of campaign experience, but Senator Morrison is also very well fitted for this district, and she has raised a lot of money. I think this district is a district that for Republicans, unfortunately, is part of that suburban area that we have just really lost and haven't gotten back. Not a reflection necessarily on Tad Jude, but more on the Republican Party writ large and what are we going to do going forward to get those votes back.
Look, if Democrats could go into a lab and create the perfect candidate following the Dobbs decision, it would be Kelly Morrison, right? Yeah. An OBGYN, a state senator, a mom, married to a veteran. I mean, the profile is just perfect. You add on top of that, she's brilliant, talented, smart, all the things you want in a politician. I'm very excited about what she's going to be doing.
Yeah, she was elected for the first time to the legislature as a state rep, I think in 2018 or so.
Yeah, fairly new.
And within months, we were all doing stories about bills she was proposing. I mean, she's been a factor wherever she has been.
Yes, she has.
And people will be watching that. And obviously, this has been a Democratic seat for the past few years.
That's right.
How about the state legislature, the House of Representatives? What is going on there? We only need a few votes to flip it from DFL control to Republican control.
Well, I got burned in 2022, so I'm being very cautious on this. I'm being very
you thought
bearish.
a lot of Republicans.
A lot of folks did. There's 4 seats is all that the Republicans need, and when you look at the landscape, there are some Greater Minnesota seats that should be obvious Republican wins.
Should be.
A couple banked, should be. But then you get a little tighter when you get into the suburbs, when you get into some of these regional centers. Yeah. And the question is, will Trump have some coattails there, or will it be problematic for some of the suburban state house would-be representatives?
And every vote really matters here.
Oh,
I mean, like really,
17
really
votes
matters.
in some races, 32 in some of those races in the north.
Every vote matters, and it's not just the vote, it's where the vote is, right? So Trump's brand and the Republican brand are actually going to be really important here for Republicans if they want to take the state house, because they have to win in suburban areas like Shakopee, like Hastings. And oftentimes Trump's brand or the Republican Party brand can be a bit off relative to those districts. And so that could actually be the reason why Republicans both win seats in Greater Minnesota and lose seats in the suburbs.
But does Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz have coattails here? Or I don't think so.
I think Minnesotans root for the home team, right? They want to see their person succeed regardless of party. Is it going to be a 5-point bump? No, but I do think there are some folks who are going to be, you know what? This is my governor. He's on the ballot. I want to show up and I want to vote.
It's interesting, though. It hasn't translated in the race. Joe Biden won Minnesota by 7 or 8 points, and there's about a 4.5-point divide right now between Trump and Vice President Harris and her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz. So I'm not sure, but I just conversely, I did some door knocking in Minnetonka, and I felt like it was sort of trending blue. That seat out in Shakopee that you were talking about, I would say it's trending red based on the door knocking that I've been hearing about. So
we'll find out very soon. We should have the Minnesota results fairly promptly.
Well, listen,
God
it's a
knows
couple
when
districts.
Presidential races. Anyway, thank you both, Abou Amara and Amy Koch. We really appreciate it. Up next, what's really going on in Wisconsin in both the presidential race and other key races. Joining us right now is Professor Chergosky with the University of Wisconsin La Crosse. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, let me ask you, what is going on in western Wisconsin? It seems that just about everything.
Yeah, just about everything. We've had multiple visits by the presidential candidates on both sides. We have a competitive U.S. House of Representatives race here between Republican incumbent Derek Van Orden and Democratic challenger Rebecca Cook. That district encompasses most of western Wisconsin. And then we have a number of competitive state legislative elections on top of a competitive U.S. Senate race between Democratic incumbent Tammy Baldwin and her Republican challenger Eric Hovde. So there's a lot that voters have to deal with on the ballot this year.
All right, let's start at the top of the presidential race. The polls that I have seen continue to show pretty much a statistical tie in
Yep.
Wisconsin. What are you hearing? What are you feeling on the ground in Western Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think both parties know that Western Wisconsin is a crucial swing region because there are certain parts of the state, certain geographic territory that both parties can have some confidence in. For example, Madison is absolutely booming in its population. It delivers high voter turnout and it delivers huge margins for the Democratic Party. In Milwaukee, Democrats are focused on turning out the vote there. In rural Wisconsin, Republicans have made significant progress. They have expanded their margins tremendously with Donald Trump in the picture. But in Western Wisconsin, there are a lot of swing voters, a lot of voters who don't have strong attachments to either party. And so this region has attracted plenty of attention.
Would you say it's sort of the swingiest region of the state or one of the swingiest?
I think that's fair to say. And
If that's a
whichever
word.
direction, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a word that fits Western Wisconsin. It's the swingiest region in one of the swingiest states in the nation. So I think it's an appropriate description.
All right, let's talk about the U.S. Senate race with Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde. A number of weeks ago, this was not even close. What has happened? And also, Tammy Baldwin has been a public figure since 1999. Her sexuality really hasn't come up in prior races, at least not for a long time. Why is her sexuality suddenly being thrust out there?
Republicans are alleging conflicts of interest between the work that Senator Baldwin's partner does. Her partner is a financial advisor. She works in the finance industry. They are alleging a conflict of interest between Baldwin's partner's work and what Baldwin does in the US Senate. And Republicans feel like they're onto something here with that line of attack. Democrats were able to open up a lead in this race by focusing on Hovde's ties to California, focusing on his wealth, and portraying him as out of touch with everyday Wisconsinites. But Republicans have some momentum in this race. They feel like they have developed a line of attack on Baldwin that is resonating with voters.
All right. And I know that the ads mention her partner, but and what the partner does for a living. That she does high investment, high net worth individuals and investments for them. But it seems the underlying theme seems to be a reminder she's gay.
Democrats have accused Republicans of going down that road. It's not something Baldwin talks a lot about. She did make history in 2012 as the first openly gay individual to be elected to the US Senate, but it's not something she brings up a lot. It is coming back to the surface. It is coming back to the public's attention right now.
Okay. So, and that race, statistical tie as well?
Statistical tie, Baldwin may have the slightest of advantages, but I don't think either candidate believes this is a slam dunk in their direction.
How big a deal is this congressional race between first-time Congressman Derek Van Orden, who's a Republican, and Democratic challenger Rebecca Cook?
It's the most competitive U.S. House of Representatives race in Wisconsin. And for years and years, this House district was held by Democrat Ron Kind, who had a moderate reputation. He seemed to fit the district quite well in terms of his ideology and his policy focus. But when he retired, Derek Van Orden was able to flip this seat for Republicans. Now Democrats are trying to flip it back in their direction, and that could be part of their broader effort to win back majority control of the House as a whole.
Okay, and could that affect the presidential race, the turnout in the 3rd congressional district?
Absolutely. Which way voter turnout goes in this region? Does it go more in the Republicans' direction or the Democratic Party's direction? Voter turnout obviously matters a lot. I think both parties understand the areas where their margins will be more favorable. But in addition to the percentage point margin, we've also got to take into account that raw vote total, that voter turnout figure.
All right, and then finally, the state assembly seat. It's rare to see a state assembly seat have so much money pouring into it and television advertising, not only in Wisconsin markets, but here in Minnesota as well, because obviously our television market covers those counties. Why is this getting so much attention, the Allison Page versus Shannon Zimmerman?
Yeah, people in the Twin Cities might understandably be wondering what this election is all about. This is one of the pivotal seats for the race for majority control of the Wisconsin State Assembly. For the first time in over a decade, Wisconsin Democrats have a real chance of winning majority control. That is a result of the new district maps, and this is one of the most pivotal seats in the race for majority control. We have seen an enormous amount of money in that election.
All right, and so literally the balance of power in the Wisconsin Assembly could depend on this one assembly seat.
Yeah, after Election Day, when we're assessing how things turned out for the balance of power in Wisconsin state government, we might well be focusing on that district.
All right. Well, listen, Professor Chergosky, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please reach out to me with comments and suggestions at esme@cbs.com. The show is free to watch on CBS News Minnesota, which you can easily get on Pluto TV and the CBS News app. The show airs every Wednesday and Thursday at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. And on Friday, post to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.